Welcome everybody to our third Thursday Lunch and Learn and our first one of 2022 on a very, very cold day here in Omaha. And I'm glad to see a lot of our usual people here because we really love having you a part of this program. Today that we titled it, and this is a discussion that Kael and I would like to do a little presentation, then discussion, is what is Holocaust education and what is the future of Holocaust education? And this is always a very timely topic, and then something even more timely happens that raises things in the news that that brings certain elements of what we do even more to light. One of the things that in our discussions early on in our introduction in IHE is, and Kael likes to remind us in education, is that there are no, and it's a part of Holocaust education, is that there are no easy, simple answers to the things that we talk about. And it really plays forth, I think, in the first part of what we want to talk about, and that is the mandating of Holocaust education. And what's very interesting and maybe unfortunate is that the term mandate, especially in the last year, has taken on a whole other meaning to it than maybe when Kael and I started here in 2018. And for example, we were approached originally by Don Bacon's office with some legislation that they were helping to sponsor on the well, not sponsor because they can't sponsor, but be involved with in the state of Nebraska in mandating Holocaust education. And throughout the country, and Kael is going to, why don't you share that map first, Kael? In the United States, obviously, we're talking here, just to clarify, not to make a joke, we're talking about the 50 states, that this is an ever-changing and in a sense ever-growing challenge. There are currently 22 states that have some form of requirement for Holocaust education. And the reason I'd rather, well, I kind of think I'd rather say require here by law than mandate, though it is mandated, again, because of the charge that that is the word mandate. And we're going to get into a little bit later here about some of the things that we've been a part of with the use of Holocaust analogies and some of the mandated protocols with COVID-19. Currently in Nebraska, there is not a requirement. Well, I should preface it. There's no mandate to saying you have to have Holocaust education. However, that doesn't mean that there isn't Holocaust education. And in the social studies standards, there is the requirement of Holocaust education. But the challenge that we see, and then I'd like Kael to just tell you what it was like when she spoke at a committee meeting about mandating of Holocaust education. One of the challenges that's faced, and Kael, you can go back now to, if you would just to not share, just so we can see each other. One of the challenges we face in this is the challenge of what that in a sense, and you'll excuse me for saying this way, this is a little bit politically charged, that there are sound bites that happen with, yes, we have mandated Holocaust education in a state. The challenge in many places is that it doesn't come with any curriculum, or it doesn't come with training, or it doesn't come with the meat and potatoes, if you want to say it in a different way. So as an example, on a national level, we have the Never Again Act, which came into being in the spring of 2020. And it's a very nicely written form of legislation that basically then hands off this requirement to the Holocaust Museum in DC and says, okay, I'll be crude, okay, now you take care of it. And the challenge is, and they either put $2 million or $5 million behind it, $2 million a year, $2 million to cover Holocaust, to take the Never Again Act and do something with it throughout the United States. And through one of what's called the Czech partnership that Donna actually started us in with the Holocaust Museum in DC, which is from like organizations like ours involved with working with them. I sit on a committee right now where we've been furthering these discussions. But to be honest with you, it's really, they're great discussions. But the challenge is what to do. And there are a whole lot of opinions. And fortunately and unfortunately, when there's a whole lot of opinions, much doesn't get done. So I'm going to say one other part of this, and I'm going to ask Kael to just talk about, to give an example of why we see some of this. One of the things that we are very much in our philosophy, our educational philosophy, that I feel like we're charged with, as far as Kael and I are developing with this, and definitely done before us with Beth and with Donna and with others in Gloria, is that we really believe strongly in relationships. And by making relationships and partnerships, and from student, teacher, in the whole spectrum of people related, we actually get a whole lot more accomplished in the idea of how to move Holocaust education into schools and how to carry forth proper Holocaust education. Both Steve and I yesterday were we're on a webinar that dealt with the use of films in the classroom, and it was absolutely fascinating. And the man who presented was talking about, like, basically what are good Holocaust films and what are ones we shouldn't use. And it was very, and I mean, I got to tell you, when we were in Kansas City down a few months ago to see the Auschwitz exhibit, I was standing in front of the rail car that was in front, and I heard a couple teachers talking. So I went over and started a conversation with them. And this woman says to me, "Oh, and we use the boy in the striped pajamas. What do you think of that?" And I politely said what I thought. And the challenge is, again, how to help train and educate and move it forward, as opposed to just checking off requirements. So Kael, will you just talk about, because the legislation was very simple: Holocaust education, I think, and other genocides. Well, I'll let Kael talk about what the bill is and the challenges with the bill.
Well, when Sarah Howard sponsored this bill in the fall of 2018, I was brand new in the job and greener than green. But to my mind, mandating this, and originally it said, to require Holocaust education and other genocides such as, and then there were some examples listed, such as Armenia, Rwanda, Bosnia. And so, of course, to my mind, this was an excellent thing. Why wouldn't you want this mandated? And so Ari Cohen and I prepared some testimony. We both went down, and I was educated really fast into a courtroom of probably 80 to 100 people from the Turkish community who were there to speak their minds about why they didn't want this. The bill was amended to take off the examples, and immediately all the Turkish people left. So somebody had to educate me right then and there about what just happened. It didn't make it out of committee, which at that point, I thought was horrible, but thanks to a really good conversation with Beth and Donna one day, Beth helped me kind of see how complicated this really was. And over the last 3 years, my thinking has really evolved about mandates. And of course, then remembering my own situation in the classroom, whenever a new mandate came down from the Nebraska Department of Education, there was this general moan of what now? What are they going to ask us to do now? What more do they want us to do? You know, we've got too much to do already, and remembering about how that can backfire with teachers, remembering my own example of not having enough time to cover what I needed to cover in history. And my wonderful, intelligent principal, who I love very much, said to me, Kael, sometimes mentioning it is covering it. And then you move on because you have to do things. And in this case, we were talking about the Civil War, right? End of the year, crunch time, I'm not getting it all in. That came to my mind, and I thought, well, that's not what we want. We don't want somebody just mentioning Holocaust education and considering it covered. And this idea then of teachers who are resistant to any new mandate, but specifically something like the Holocaust, and trusting this information in their hands is a little bit concerning. Not a little bit, it's a lot concerning. And then of course, Beth said, are you ready for this? And I said, what do you mean? And so if this becomes a mandate in our state, then the who, what, when, where, why, hows of how this is going to be taught, is IHE ready to help anybody at any level in any way to help them find what they need to find? So it kind of exploded into this kind of myriad of concerns and things to consider that I've evolved over the last 3 years. Then this whole explosion with state standards, this idea that mandate has very negative connotations now with vaccine and mask mandates, which has put a whole new spin on how this could go really wrong. So I think Scott and I both agree that mandates themselves are not necessarily a good nor a bad thing, but they need to come with some funding. They need to come with some more clarity. And where it stands right now in our own legislature is it's pretty much non-existent. It became one line in a 100+ page omnibus bill at the end of the legislative session in 2020, that because of what has happened with COVID and things since then has, I think, all but fallen off the radar. And I don't really understand how that works, that in the legislature, that when a bill doesn't make it then and is not brought back forward. Maybe Beth can help me with that. But I think that has been my experience on how my own thinking has evolved as far as mandates are concerned, which is why, as Scott said, we are determined to keep making relationships across the state. Because also these people who self-select to teach the Holocaust are usually people who have a good heart and a good mind for this subject matter. And if we can pull more of those teachers into kind of our consortium and our fold, if and when the state is ready for a mandate, there will already be so many things in place in so many districts that the districts will say, oh, we got this covered. That is my hope.
So what also has happened is, let me give you an example. This was in a meeting that we had with our Czech partners about 2 months ago. In one of the states, so often states have commissions that help with with Holocaust education. In one state, they could no longer use the term Nazi. They had to say the full name of the party out. And the reason for it was that there was a side that wanted to make sure that the word socialist and socialism was stated in order to draw a negative connotation with socialism. So again, a lot of this challenge then becomes, or in this is the political charge of this. And I want to give you a couple examples of some other aspects that have happened to us. We got contacted about a year ago, about from a very, very right-wing evangelical Christian group that wanted to work with us to work towards mandating Holocaust education. I decided to do some research on the group and did this before we arranged to have a meeting with them. First of all, I said, okay, so what, I asked them to explain more what they meant, because, and it took about 2 months to get back to me, which was good because, again, it just put it down the road a little bit here. But I did some research with people I know. I used to live in the DC area, and people who were involved in certain types of interfaith work and some other areas, and asked them what they knew about this group. And they were very selective in the language they used back to me about who this group was and what they thought about having a discussion with them. I went to the ADL here with Gary Nachman, asked if what their understanding of this group was in terms of anti-Semitism, and Alan Potash is the CEO at the time. I wanted to be real, I wanted to have all my ducks in line, as opposed to just saying, no, I don't want to talk to you, though that was advised by some of them. And I did have the conversation, and Kael was involved in it too. And the long and short was, we said to them exactly kind of what we're saying to you. We said, we believe in establishing relationships, and we feel that our energy is best spent in the development of curriculum, in the development of programming, in the development of assisting teachers, schools, school districts in the area of the education. They weren't particularly big on what we were saying. They want to push it. They felt that the only way to rid this country of anti-Semitism was through Holocaust education. And we listened to them, but within their mantra and who they are, when you do a little bit more researching in their agenda, it is not a positive agenda towards those of us who are Jewish. Okay, meaning that what they want religiously to happen in the world would not be good for us as a people. So we left it in their hands. We said, okay, let's continue this conversation. We look forward to hearing from you. And we haven't heard anything back. And obviously we're not chasing them down. In the meantime, this group has appeared in the news from time to time, and we were very smart in the way we handled it. Okay?
And it has become apparent to me that anything can be co-opted for someone's own agenda. And so I'm always telling Scott that everything is political, but not everything needs to be partisan. And so trying to keep Holocaust education nonpartisan and a human rights concern is still happening, but in this current climate, it's become a little bit more charged and complicated. So I would love to know what you think about Holocaust mandates. If you have any strong thoughts, opinions, questions, this would be a good time to just pop yourself off mute and ask them.
So please take yourself off mute. We'd love to hear from you in this.
There's Beth, yay.
Well, actually, this is a pitch from Ari. I saw on his, thank you, first of all, for talking about this and for saying, for understanding that the preparation for such a huge task is important. And I appreciate very much that this has been a process, and we're sort of lucky that COVID stopped the bill in its place, because the bill also started taking different directions. Ernie Chambers was concerned about whether it was going to address issues of African-American history, and that was even before George Floyd. So we're definitely in a different place at the moment. but I'm going to put in the chat. There was a headline about Don Bacon opening a
Right.
caucus for the advancement of Torah values.
Yeah, there's an article in fact, I just sent Kael the article this morning.
Yeah, I'm putting it in the, well, this is from his website. So just, so we know what's going on internationally, and also that Deborah Lipstadt has not been put in her position yet in the State Department as, the overseer of anti-Semitism in this country. So there's some pieces that are really sort of missing. And the more that the IHE continues to just dig in and make those relationships, the more positive and influential this state will continue to be in Holocaust education.
And it's interesting you raise two parts of that, and that is, that with Deborah not being and first of all, she is so qualified to be in this position. She posted something this morning. There was an editorial from somebody who sees differently than she does on many topics, who basically said, what are we waiting for? It's time to approve her. And but it's caught up with politics, and that's part of the challenge also that we face here, is that most people, I venture to say, want to do the right thing. They absolutely do, but they don't quite understand the complexity of what they may be asking for or who they may be partnering with. And I think that becomes extremely complicated and extremely problematic. And again, I want to stress here that it's the partnership element. And we'd like to give you a couple examples. And one is how things happen, sometimes strictly a mistake happening, and then it becomes newsworthy or somehow newsworthy and doesn't become educational. And we had an experience here last year that I was extremely proud that how IHE as an organization handled this, and more proud on how Kael in her position handled it, and just as the person she is. And that is an incident that happened in West Side School District. And that is that there was a teacher who they had a quote board, and I think it was they did like a quote a week, and the woman put a quote up on the board, and it was attributed to Adolf Hitler. It was not the thing to do, okay, obviously. And the reason I say attributed to that, in research, no one is sure if Hitler actually said the quote, and I'm sorry, I don't remember exactly what it said. But there was, on social media, immediately, there was this call that this teacher should be fired immediately, and that this should be that drastic punishment. Now, because of relationships and other things that were happening within West Side that IHE was involved with, Kael was contacted, and Kael, why don't you carry it from there?
Well, this turned out to be an actual beautifully pitched softball, and quite easy, because this teacher was already realized what she had done, and is actually someone who is really committed to teaching about civil rights, anti-Semitism, and the Holocaust. So this was easy. But I think it's worth saying that it was great that we reached out and said, hey, can we talk to you about this, and why we see this as problematic? And she had already seen it as soon as somebody else pointed out that this was not acceptable, and she thought about it, and she already knew that. But there are a lot of people who it's not quite so easy. And Scott had an experience with one of those. Was it just last week?
Yes.
Yeah. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, I will in one second, but I want to go a little bit further because Kael left out really like how amazing this was because of the partnership that she established. During the week of understanding, the school that was where this happened, 1,000 students and faculty heard from heard survivor testimony because we worked with the school as opposed to yelling and screaming and trying to get press on this. We didn't cancel them out, and we just won't do that. People.
Oh, well, hey, as long as we're tooting our own horn.
Please.
We also got the art program in there this year, Donna.
Yep.
We also got the refugee books and curriculum in there, and they're also a No Place for Hate school. So that actually was a really good opportunity that we seized, and there's Holocaust education going on in their art program and in their 8th grade English. And
so we're getting things accomplished as opposed to that. So the governor of Nebraska appointed a new member to the state school board. And this person on their Twitter feed had used in a comparison of mandating wearing a mask and vaccine mandates as he attributed it to being the same as the Holocaust. In this case, he didn't say this word, but he was inferring the marking of Jews having to wear the yellow star. So actually, Ari Cohn and I bumped into each other, Dr. Ari Cohn, bumped into each other here at the Jewish Community Center, and he said, he was contacted by somebody else, and what did I think about how we should approach this? Should we ask for a meeting? Should we do this? Should we do that? Just to give you a little background, when this happened last spring with a law firm in the state of Nebraska who spoke out very much about this, Ari, Joe Steinhacker, and I forgot who else, we sent a letter and made some phone calls asking for if this law firm would meet with us so we could discuss what was said. And they wouldn't take our phone calls, they wouldn't answer our letter, they wouldn't answer our emails. Okay, so I decided, just thinking this through, and actually discussed it with Kael and with Ariel at a staff meeting. I said, I wonder if I send an email to this person and I send it with the tone of congratulating the person on being appointed to the school board, which is true, and also phrase that I would love to discuss with them why, as us as IHE, myself as a Holocaust educator, why we prefer that Holocaust comparisons not be used. And I was not attacking, I was very passive actually in my email. I thought there's no way in heck that this person is going to respond back to me, but I felt very obligated to say something. Well, lo and behold, 2 hours later, I get a response that thank you for your email, and I'd love to meet with you, and I'm happy to come to Omaha to meet face to face. So I seized the opportunity, and the approach that I took with this person was, I'm not going to talk politics. Okay, I'm not going to talk about how maybe I personally feel about, first of all, it's irrelevant, how I feel about mask mandates and those types of things. I'm going to talk to him about why we don't use these comparisons. And then what I did was I went and did some research and found some documentation, some wonderful articles from people who know a whole lot more than I do about why we don't use these comparisons. And I had a discussion with him. And I also, just so you know, Beth and Donna, gave him a copy of the Portraits of Survival book because I wanted him to see the eyes of our survivors. Okay, I wanted him to know what the force of what he was saying. It's funny, this was a win-win. I mean, he said, you're absolutely right, I shouldn't have done it. and I won't ever do it again. So, and then we discussed about how he could also be of assistance to IHE in the part of the state that he is from, which is the central part of the state, with making some introductions if we'd like in some areas. So we made a relationship, a partnership. And part of what I talked to him about, and it's part of the message that comes across in I think what Agnes talks about and what others who are survivors, is that, well, is that this doesn't teach the message of what they want people to hear and know from their experience. And then further, that the idea of whether, well, of being vaccinated and wearing a mask is to better our society, not to harm our society. And that things like the yellow star and those that fall under the Nuremberg laws were meant to take away the humanness of a group of people, and to bring people down, not to encourage life. And so we had a great discussion. And I think that, I mean, I'm not kidding myself that I changed the world, but at least maybe in this one case, he won't use that comparison again. Now, I want to ask a question to you. Why do you think people want to feel safe using those comparisons, or why do they? What are they trying to accomplish when they give examples of the Holocaust within modernity? And
This is definitely where he wants to hear from you, because I give him an earful weekly about what I think.
I'll share with you, Scott. I think in the past 6 years, all of the people who may have thought these things became emboldened to say them out loud. That's my feeling, right? Anti-Semitism has always existed. As I put in a note to Kael, I know Deborah Lipstadt. She grew up close to where I did. I have friends who went to a Hebrew high school, which I did not go after 8th grade. So I know people who continued on and went to high school with her. It's appalling to me that there's a member of Congress who is so thin-skinned to feel slighted by something she may have said, that until she gives a full apology, and I don't trust that even that would make them vote to confirm her. People are just emboldened, and they of course have no idea. So giving this man the book with some of the survivors in our area and their stories may help. Hearing them, I mean, there's a huge amount of education necessary for a lot of people to understand when there's still people in this country who don't believe it actually happened.
Well, in the case right now, we're not having the people, we don't face as much denial as much as people wanting to use the Holocaust in a way that isn't appropriate to push an agenda that's totally separate from what Holocaust education is supposed to accomplish. So why are people using these? I mean, is it the shock value? Anyone want to comment?
I think it's shock value. It's we live in a time where fear is stoked to get people to agree what they're thinking. And what the Nazis did, the Holocaust was horrible. And if I can get you to believe that wearing a mask or getting vaccinated is horrible, that's what I want to do. And I think it's fear and shock.
Do you think it accomplishes anything? Do you think that it enforces with people that they should not wear this, not do that? I mean, do you think it works at all in a positive, well, not a positive way, but works in favor of the people who are using these comparisons, that it actually changes people or helps people to follow what they're saying?
I think it just cements their belief, confirmation bias.
Okay. You want to explain what that means?
Well, you have a feeling, you have an idea, you have a mindset, and anything that sounds like it confirms your mindset, confirms that you are right, whether what that example is accurate or based on fact. But because it agrees with how you agree, it confirms your bias. Not a great explanation. But
No. Anyone else want to comment? Agnes, can I ask you how does, as a survivor, how do you feel when people use these comparisons?
Well, I could almost laugh at them, but it's not funny because there is no such comparison. How can you compare a yellow star with a shot in the arm or a mask? I mean, it's just ludicrous. But what I am sitting here and thinking is that I came here into this country as a refugee in 1947, so I've been here a couple of years, and I have never felt anti-Semitism so much in all the years I've been here as I'm feeling it right now. And it has definitely exploded again, and it scares me to death. And when I speak to kids, they ask some very good questions, and many of them ask me, so what can we do to help the situation? And give me some good answers to help me create the atmosphere I should be creating. Because I tell them to educate, and tell them that you're no different than he is or she is, and to look beyond the person's skin color to find out who they really are, etc., etc. So I've had this conversation through a teacher with a student in Montana who said, but you're different than I am. And I said, how am I different? I have 2 arms, 2 legs, 2 eyes, a nose, and a mouth. How am I different? I said, perhaps I pray differently than you do, but maybe you are the one who's different with that. So it kind of stumped this child because he couldn't come up with it, but his answer was, but you're different. So I would love to hear some feedback from you and Kael on how to answer these questions.
Well, I'm going to fall back on my never give simple answers to complex questions, which is like one of the very first points in Holocaust education pedagogy. However, I'm also going to tell you something my father said when we were originally talking about when multiculturalism, with this concept of multiculturalism first came on the education scene. And he said, this is why we have 2 eyes, one eye to see the similarities and one eye to see the differences. May we keep both of our eyes open. And that has always stayed with me because I think this is definitely a both and, right? We
Oh,
are.
I like that answer, Kael. I really liked it.
Oh, good. Take that and run, because we all are human and have those similarities. And yet there are things that are different about us that are, I think, what makes the world go, because if everybody was exactly alike, what a boring world it would be. Yeah.
You know, within this, in a moment, we want to play for you an example of what's that? I've got it up.
I forgot. Yeah, I forgot.
I've got it up here ready to go. I just have to then share the screen and be a tech person here for a second. But we had a unique thing. Well, everything I say is unique, but a couple years ago, we were approached on two different levels, one from a teacher, one through something through, well, a couple of things, some professor who had worked or knows Beth from years ago, and about working with him and their association with the Anne Frank House, and Kael can tell us more about this afterwards, about an exhibit they had, Anne Frank, A History for Today. It's a traveling exhibit and education program. And so Kael and I discussed, well, should we look into being involved in this? And we went back and forth, and we spoke with one of our teachers, Megan, who we work with, and we decided, yes, let's see what we can do. And it required finding funding, which we're able to do within the first year. If you know of others who'd like to help us with further years, we're working on that right now. But we then COVID hit, and this exhibit and program was put on hold. And since September, our goal with this program is to get into rural Nebraska and to provide them with this program, which we're going to show you in a second. A student-made, right, Kael, student-made explanation of this that they used. And it's absolutely fascinating where we're going with this, and our relationship with the Anne Frank House and with their professional staff here, which Kael will tell us all about after, is growing. And this is, again, getting to right into getting dirty, if you want to say it any better, as opposed to spending time working on things that are just going to bog us down. So give me 1 second to share my screen.
While he's doing that, this happened at Kearney High School. It was a senior in high school who did it as his final project. And at this training, where these two young women who are speaking, there was also Overton High School and Loop City High School. Students were there to be for this Anne Frank training.
Okay, Kael, is the screen, is it up?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, so here we go.
Kearney High School. My work through the Institute for Holocaust Education in Omaha, Nebraska, and Kael, who is the director there for education, she reached out in late spring of last year and said, would Kearney High School be willing to host the Anne Frank exhibit, which would be kind of the host site for other schools coming here to train, and have our students be ambassadors to be kind of the training guides for other students. And I was like, absolutely, I think this would be an incredible opportunity for our kids to serve in these leadership roles and for our students to be able to immerse themselves in the story of Anne Frank. That's a really familiar story. A lot of our classes, whether in middle school or in high school, that's one of the stories, the diaries that they read. And I thought that this would just be a really great opportunity for them to see some authentic history be brought here to central Nebraska. And then that piece of being able to train student leaders, students that have been in my Holocaust elective class, to be able to take that next step in their journey of Holocaust education. I always ask them the question, okay, now that you've learned about the Holocaust, do you feel like you have an obligation to do something about it, to act on that, to, that grandiose idea of, making the world a better place when you see atrocities happening or when you see prejudice, discrimination, those types of things. And I thought, well, this is a great opportunity for them to take what they've learned and really put that into action through education. And the students that I asked were fantastic. They jumped on board. They were all enthusiastic yeses that they wanted to participate in this. And it was really encouraging to see them not only interact with our students here at Kearney High School, but to see them interact with the students from the other schools that participated, as well as with Kael from the Institute and Mario, who traveled in from South Carolina and helped with the training as well.
Well, I think people should learn about the Holocaust mainly because while it may seem like something that people can just distance themselves from, it is actually like very applicable in today's society. So because sometimes like when you have like a middle school or an elementary school understanding of what happened during the Holocaust, people are just like, oh, that's something that's a one-off. It happened in Germany one time because some really bad guy took over and then people died, and that's all the further they get into it. But when you kind of make parallels between Holocaust education and like things going on in the political spectrum today, you can kind of see like where things started emerging, because it wasn't just Hitler woke up one day and decided to kill the Jews. It was not that oversimplified. And I think that in order to prevent some sort of tragedy like this from happening in the future, I think like it is the duty of our generation right now to be like keeping an eye on this and making sure that when something like this is coming up, we are addressing it early and we are taking the proactive steps that are needed to make sure that everybody's in a world where like they're accepted. There's no like racial discrimination. Obviously that's an extreme example, but just to make sure that something like this never happens in the future, and that people understand that this is something that could be repeated, and there have been multiple genocides in history. It is not just one and done. There's something that's always pertinent no matter who you are and what time you're living in. At the beginning of our training, we didn't just like sit there and learn about the Holocaust. It wasn't like a history class where we just sat there and we're like, this happened at this date, this happened at this date, this law was put into place. It wasn't really like that. We had a lot of activities where it was kind of more of like acknowledging our own subtle biases and kind of just seeing like how these sentiments that led to the Holocaust were kind of presented in a modern day sense. So we had activities where we were like asked to judge people without like knowing who they were, or like we were given panels with different like bad behaviors and asked to rank how bad were they, or even like just trying to like look at pictures and tell who was Jewish. And that was kind of, I think it was really effective in helping us like acknowledge that this was something that it's not just like the facts of history. It kind of got us like more into like knowing the mindset behind it and just like figuring out that this is why it happened and this is how it could be applied today.
I'd say this experience affected me because I've never, like when I took the class, I could think about it for myself, but I've never interpreted it for others, if that makes sense. And a lot of the stories about this experience were around kids our age. And so when we went to the middle schools and we got to talk to them about it, I could relate topics. Like there was a picture of Anne when she was 2 with like her father and her sister. And I would say to the middle schoolers, like during this time, the biggest thing we had to worry about was learning to ride a bike. Whereas they were dealing with the whole like economic thing and being sent to concentration camps. So just to like learn how to tell the story to others and kind of put it in a perspective that you can relate your own life to. I thought it was okay. As the class, we learned about topics as a whole, but we didn't really zone in on specific lives of stories. So I thought it was cool that you'd get a walk around the whole thing and just see her life, but then you'd also get to see how the economic stuff incorporated into her life, because every other panel would be the history stuff, and then the other panels would be her life, so it'd get to like incorporate it. I don't know, I thought it was cool just to see individual stories. I know that's one story that we tend to really focus on because she's the most well-known because we have her stuff, but it also showed me how much we don't know about it.
You know, there's so many lessons that can be learned from the murder of 11 million people. You know, I remember teaching an American history class. I remember always being so, and I tell my students this, I remember being so like, hey, there's one section in this whole American history book that is dedicated to the Holocaust. And I would get really frustrated about that. And so, you know, thankfully we had a school district that was very supportive of having an elective course on this, because, you know, when you talk about, again, prejudice, stereotyping, racism, discrimination, xenophobia, these are all things that are also in the here and now very present and that need to be addressed and talked about and learned about. Those things I feel are so important as far as the why study the Holocaust. It gives us that platform. I also think it's important to study the Holocaust because we need to tell the stories of those 11 million. We need to talk about the Anne Franks and the Elie Wiesels, and we need to not let their stories be forgotten, because that's when it happens again and again as far as other genocides. And so for me, it's a passion of mine to, and it's important, and it's meaningful, and it's emotional, and it's raw, but it's so very important to make sure that we continue to get that lesson out there to be heard by our students, to carry on that message.
thanks for taking the time to watch that. It always gets me a little choked up. But this is a relationship that Donna started with Jessica Day way back before my time. And it makes me, yep. And it makes me very proud that IHE has been able to take this relationship that Donna built with Jessica and Kearney, which is my hometown, right? And I didn't even know this was happening, and to take it and to carry it forward. But this, I don't know, this video makes me very emotional.
What can we tell us where you've been so far, the two trips so far, and where you see this going?
So we started in Kearney, and we had Kearney, Overton, and Loop City. And I just want to tell you, Overton is a little town on the interstate on the other side of Kearney. Small, very small, has a K through 12 school in one building, small. But two things, I was talking to one of the young gals that came. She was a freshman, and with the teacher, and she was telling me about a house. She lives in the country, a house, Steve and I have talked about this, on the road to her house that had a big swastika flag on the roof. And she said, I knew that wasn't a good thing, but now I know why. And Steve and I have talked about this. We were trying to nail down where this house was, and I have not been able to sleuth that out, Steve. But another thing is that there is, and if you come from the middle of the state, you know, in the truck stop at the Overton Exchange is an excellent Indian restaurant. So finding Indian food in the middle of the state is very rare, but you can find it in this truck stop. And the teacher was telling me that a new Indian family had moved to town with a high school aged boy to help out in this restaurant. And this boy ate lunch in her room every day because he was bullied and teased and having a really hard time adjusting, and people were making fun of him and saying really cruel things. And she looked at me and she got tears in her eyes, and she said, this is why we need this exhibit in Overton. And so then I went to the Sandhills in December, and I did Taylor and Ansley and Ord, those three small towns, and they will each have the exhibit for 3 weeks. And I trained about 20 students from those three schools. And then at the end of February, beginning of March, I will go to Auburn, and I will have students from Auburn, Nebraska City, and Humboldt, Taylor. It's a consolidated school district, HTRS. And I will do that, and that'll be it for the first year. And then the plan is to take it out in the second year. But Becca put something interesting in the chat about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And Beth talked before about how the Holocaust mandate kind of, started expanding, and Ernie Chambers was talking, basically about, well, what about this atrocity? And what about that? And in particular, his was the traumatization and the historical trauma and current difficulties from slavery. So to me, this is all connected. Yeah. Right? That this is where we keep both eyes open, because there is Holocaust education, and then there is all of this other stuff over here that is connected and important, but different. And yet all that goes together. And this is why I think, me personally, feel that Holocaust education is so important, because where we are now, I'm gonna spin off for 1 minute, so forgive me, but when Beth and Donna started this, there was this is my understanding, so few good materials and curriculum available. And Beth wrote a lot. Donna created a lot. This was really starting from scratch. Now we find there's almost, there's a lot of things out there, sometimes so much that people cannot kind of weed through and figure out how to use it. And so I see going into the next 20 years of IHE that what Scott and I have to do is very different than what Beth and Donna did. And so we're kind of tiptoeing our way in, trying to figure out what that looks like as we go. But circling back to where the future is, I think it is, well, we know it's in the schools, and we want it to be done well, and we want it to be done with the understanding that this will open doors to more conversations, to all of those connected pieces that basically comes down to how do we really make a more just and equitable world? How do we really create an environment where we can say never again and be confident that that will happen? And that is hard. And I think it takes a lot of seed sowing, so to speak. And that is what we hope to do in the future. Totally, I think I got off the main subject there. So
Well, actually, I don't think you did, because just in a little bit of a concluding, but we can continue comment, is that I think with what Kael said, to me personally, is what I feel is missing when people want to have legislation that mandates to teach Holocaust education. Meaning, I think they very much see that, knowing that this was a horrible event, but they see it kind of what was one of the people said in the clip we showed, as strictly a history lesson. And that is not why we're doing what we're doing. So does anyone else have any comments they'd like to make? Beth, please.
I always have a comment, don't I? Sorry, guys.
We appreciate
Yes.
your comments.
First of all, the outreach throughout the state is fabulous with the exhibit, and I hope it continues to grow. I want to just say one quick thing about the teacher mentioning 11 million people. That is a random number, and I'm including it's an old article, but it shows how Holocaust historians look at that number and why it is not appropriate to use 11 million. There were 6 million Jews documented who were murdered because of being Jewish, and that other 5 million number was created out of the air. So we have to be cautious about how we talk about our Holocaust content and understanding and history. The other thing that I wanted to address, Agnes, is that I've been doing some work on discourse, and Gloria is sitting with a paper, a very long paper that she's editing for the 5th time for me, but and I took 3 different media pieces from Holocaust Education to look how discourse has been managed and changed and reused today over the years, over these 80 years. And I think one of the things we need to look at in our daily lives, because this discourse is so prevalent in our news from our educational leaders without even realizing, as Scott gave the example, is that when we stop the discourse and confront it, just like we said for years, stop the bullying, in a sense, that is a kind of bullying. So stopping discourse, bringing people to understand that what they hear isn't necessarily true, and that they need to look for real answers of how they're using their language, how things are presented to us without thought. And so I think that in speaking to children or students or teachers, we have to question them back. Look in that mirror. Are you saying this because you know it, or are you saying this because you've heard it?
And then waiting for the answer, because we know the answer. We know they are saying it because they have heard it. oftentimes. And that is what I found, that is the hard part, is asking that question and then waiting for the answer and letting them talk it out, which I think is part of, I think Anne put something back in the chat. Anne and Sherry put some things in the chat. I'm so sorry we didn't get to them, but Anne said something about like not having, using these things is for impact, but also reflects their overall lack of understanding of the big picture, which I think is what Beth just said. But I have found that this is something that we all do. We find something, like Donna said, that confirms our bias, that makes sense to us. And then that's true, right? That's true. And so that I have found to be one of the real gifts, unexpected gifts of this job, is that it has made me confront my own bias, which I don't always like what I see. But this idea of, okay, who said that? Why did they say it? What perspective? Now, just interestingly enough, I know it's past the hour. We usually allow 90 minutes. So if you have to go for lunch, please feel free. And thank you so much for coming. But I, for one, have an extra 30 minutes because my boss said so. So I can just stay on. But this idea of multiple perspectives and using both eyes is something that we put into the Nebraska State Standards in 2019. And Donna bequeathed me her role on the Nebraska State Social Studies Board, which at the time I thought, oh man, I don't know what I have to contribute to this, but it has been a real gift, Donna. So thank you for that one too. To really hear and understand what's going on as far as social studies standards, how they're created, how we were so lucky that we got them passed in 2019, because now in this new climate, they're coming under fire. This is one of the things that they have put in, is multiple perspectives, looking at anything, whether it is a historical event or an economic policy, from multiple perspectives, especially calling attention to marginalized populations and trying to do what I call walking around an idea or an event or a picture and trying to see it from all sides. And that gives me a lot of hope. I mean, that's going to take a long time to settle in and become a new thing, but it also requires us to dig deeper and get off the tip of the iceberg, to have a more thorough understanding, to have conversations rather than just impart information, and to learn how to question these things. Like I know exactly why Jessica uses 11 million, because she's a museum teacher fellow that was trained 10 years ago, right? And this idea that used to be the definition of the Holocaust, the murder of 6 million Jews and 5 million others, right? But how that has evolved, how that has become a hook for people to distort and to manipulate for their own agendas.
So I think the one thing is very obvious is that this is a complex topic. The most important thing that we also want to do is just continue the conversation. And I think that it's why we're doing it. It's why I think we've chosen to do the approach that we are, but also to continue what we're doing. We do feel that we're being more our time is best spent right now. The way we're developing our programs, our relationships. I just want to tell you about one other thing here quickly, and this is that we're finding in the changing environment, and that is a number of years ago we had a play, My Broken Doll, about B. Carp, and it went physically into schools, and it was very successful. I like to say they did too good of a job, because it then became hard to book to do. So we decided that let's try to develop a series of plays that we have that we could kind of do a rotation of. And so we did premiere last November our new play, and when we go away, with the idea originally pre-COVID that this play would physically go into schools. And what happened is, as a result, was that we decided that we weren't going to be able to get into schools physically in the way we wanted because of, at this point, it was strictly COVID. It wasn't the shortages and the issues they're having right now. And so it was recorded, and the recording is being edited now. Kael and I just reviewed it and gave our suggestions. It's beautifully done. And we're developing lessons to go with it. And we will physically be able to give it to schools to use individually in their classrooms, as opposed to right now where gathering of large groups is not necessarily possible. And will accomplish, we hope, the same things that My Broken Doll did. And I think that that's the other thing that we have to be very open to. And that is that we're constantly having to re-examine how we do basically everything because of the changing environment. And maybe that's also one of the reasons that we don't want to put ourselves into a box that may come with, whether it be legislation or other things like that, because it may, I don't want to say it'll stifle our creativity, but it may stifle our abilities to do what we're doing now. And so we're very passionate about what we do. We want to continue what we're doing, and both fortunately and unfortunately, there's still a whole lot of work for us to do. Next month, we're going to hear from Dr. Jake Newsom. Jake is on the faculty staff of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum on a number of topics. I first met him at a training I was at a couple years ago. He has very interesting research on Nazism and it's called Approaching Nazism and Jim Crow in the Classroom. And so I think I'm fascinated by the work he's done. He's just returned from paternity leave, and I'm very much looking forward to having him educate us on the 17th of February at 11:30. Kael and I will be very happy to stick around for a couple minutes if anybody else has any questions, but we thank you for being here today and participating, and we look forward to continuing the discussion.
Thank you for doing a great program.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Agnes.
Thanks, Agnes.
Thank you all for being here.
You know, would it be possible? Today's teachers were not around at the time of the Holocaust. So would it be possible to do seminars for teachers so
Yes.
that they're able to teach better?
Yeah, you know, we absolutely, in fact, we were supposed to do a higher level one that we were going to do with, Beth was actually be a part of with an organization through the University of Nebraska-Lincoln and part of their department there. Unfortunately, right now, one of the challenges we're facing is teachers, because of shortages. This is actually, they couldn't get enough subs. This was in the fall term. Now it's even harder right now for them to get away. So we have absolutely plans. We hope next year to get back into the teacher in service market. But right now, other than what we notify, most importantly, what we do is we have a great source of lots of webinars from the organizations that we're associated with educationally that we let teachers know about that they can do on their own time, because right now they have no time. So the answer, the complicated answer is, yeah, we want to continue doing that. It's just that we're faced with a tough situation with what teachers can actually get away and do at this point.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, Donna did gave me a great, what do you call it, frame for the teacher workshops and in-services she did when she was in my role. And so we were able to replicate that once right before COVID hit. Sometimes I forget that 2/3 of my time with IHE have been spent during COVID. Then I remember why maybe I'm so frazzled all the time. And then I think, oh, I wonder what it will be like when this is all over. But yeah, there is definitely a year before COVID where things were just getting up and running, and then things that we've had to tweak and change because of COVID. But teacher workshops and in-services is something that we will definitely go back to as soon as we possibly can.
It's
Because
also
when
kind
I
of,
talk to a group of kids, I can assess within 10 minutes of my speaking whether the teacher had her heart in teaching it or it was a curriculum that had to be taught. I mean, I can pick that up from the kids so quickly. Their attitudes go right along with the teachers.
all the more reason that we want to form relationships.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye, everyone. Stay warm. Hope to see you in February.
Stay healthy, all of you.
You too.
You too.
It's great to see you, Agnes.
Nice to see you too.
Really good to see you. I'm so glad you had enough energy for this.
Now I'm gonna go lie down.
Okay, sending hugs.
All right.
Bye.
Bye, dear.